Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program titled On Collecting the Imaginary. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and host the webinar this evening. So thanks for being here. Tonight, we have more than, 130 folks who have registered to join us. Some of them are already here. The rest can join us in progress. Thanks, everyone, for making it tonight. For those of you that might be new to the Book Club of California, the Book Club of California is a nonprofit, member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the literature and the history of California and the West. Now, the book club publishes limited edition, finely made books. We have a scholarly journal, and we have keepsakes for our members. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one we're doing this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, but the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to just visit us online at bccbooks.org to join or to donate to the book club or to find out more. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. Again, the program is titled On Collecting the Imaginary. Now, this program marks the closing of the Imaginary Books exhibition that has been on view at the book club since mid-March. And our presenter is Reid Byers. Now, Reid Byers is an author, a collector, and a curator. He serves as the president of the Baxter Society, the Bibliophilic Association of Northern New England. He is the author of The Private Library, which was honored as one of the best nonfiction books of 2021 by the Washington Post. Now, his current book, Imaginary Books, Lost, Unfinished, and Fictive Works Found Only in Other Books, is published by Oak Knoll, and it is the subject of the exhibition that was first on view at the Grolier Club in New York, and most recently here at the Book Club in California. Now, if you have questions for our speaker, please use the chat and the Q&A functions in Zoom. We should have time towards the end of the presentation, top of the hour, to take questions, and we'll do that using the chat and the Q&A. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, author, collector, curator, and friend, Reid Byers. Reid, it's all yours.
Kevin, thank you. Thank you so very much for that kind introduction. And everyone, thank you for coming tonight. And I want to thank the club especially for having hosted this exhibition. At the beginning of the show, there may have been some odd miscellaneous topics that I have inadvertently omitted or avoided out of some misplaced sense of decency. And I thought I might cover some of those topics tonight. Things are not always as they seem. There are whole days when my ontological compass refuses to point due real. And when discussing my collection, I am what is called an unreliable narrator. And so it is always best to take what I have to say with a grain of salt. Collecting the imaginary is something of a contradiction in terms. The imaginary is immaterial, and collecting the immaterial seems on the face of it impossible. And yet we do it fairly often. Even a simple shopping list can constitute some sort of collection, and some lists can be such intentional collections that they can reliably indicate the presence of the true collecting gene. My brother Tom collects amusing names for characters in a play that he will never write, such as Penny Dreadful, Gene Poole, Cliff Hanger, and Skip Intro, as well as the twins Anne Electric and her sister Di, and their sleazy friends Bill Me Later and Que Sera Sera. His World War II play includes Corporal Punishment, Private Parts, Colonel O'Truth, and Major Payne. So you get the idea. My friend Brian Garner collects retronyms, newer names for an older thing to differentiate it from the newer thing. So landline phone, which we used to call a phone, or brick and mortar store, which used to be a store. And similarly, analog clock, conventional oven, manual transmission, and classic Coke. Again, you get the idea. So these collections are immaterial. They're just lists. If our listing activity is of things that do not exist in reality, if they are immaterial but also a realia, then we're collecting the imaginary. By way of example, we might collect in a list form imaginary plants, listing, say, Audrey in Little Shop of Horrors, or the Malorn trees in Lothlorien in Tolkien, or the Whomping Willow at Hogwarts, or Yggdrasil. We might collect imaginary games and have Pooh Sticks, Flamingo Croquet, the Glass Bead Game, Ender's Game. We might collect imaginary countries at Brobdingnag, Fredonia, Ruritania, Wakanda. List collections have several advantages. First, you can pursue your hobby anywhere, even in the dentist's waiting room or sequestered on jury duty. Second, it costs nothing but a pen and some 3x5 cards. And third, if you have enough items in your collection, you can make a book out of it. Here are some books made from lists of the imaginary. Here is the Dictionary of Imaginary Places by Alberto Manguel and Johnny Guadalupe. Here is the Book of Imaginary Beings by Borges. Imaginary Postcards by Jonathan Williams. The History of Imaginary Spinning Tops by Nick Bantic. Yes. Imaginary Ethnographies by Gabrielle Schwab. And I love this. This is the Encyclopedia of Exploration, Volume 5, Invented and Apocryphal Narratives of Travel by Ray How'd-You-Go. And yes, How'd-You-Go is the name of the author. Or this fine catalog for an exhibition, which is a good example as well. But my favorite of these books, the most interesting one, is Stéphane Mahieu's book, The Catalogue des Vaisseaux Imaginaires ou l'autre côté des vagues, the Catalogue of Imaginary Ships, or the Other Side of the Waves. So I want to stop here and let's consider, what would it mean to collect, say, imaginary ships? It could mean, of course, that Stéphane collects lists of imaginary ships. So African Queen from Forrester, the Argo from Jason and the Argonauts, Erasmus, that's Blackthorn's ship in Shogun, Hispaniola from Treasure Island, the Nautilus, of course, from 20,000 Leagues, the Indomitable from Billy Budd, HMS Surprise from the eponymous novel by Patrick O'Brian, the Pequod from Moby Dick, Red October from the novel by Tom Clancy, or the USS Kane from Wook's great The Kane Mutiny. This collection could just be a simple list. Or It could mean that he collects descriptions of imaginary ships. For example, the Nautilus is described in chapters 11 through 13 of 20,000 Leagues Beneath the Sea. And indeed, this is what Mayhew has done in his book of imaginary ships. This is the collection level for that. However, it could mean that he seeks out pictures of the ships and collects them. So here are the Nautilus and Red October, and that is not the USS Kane, but it is a Clemson-class destroyer minesweeper, and it can stand in for the Kane. He could collect retouched photographs of real ships, or pictures from movies, or watercolors, or oil paintings, or pictures with any constraint that he fancies, or none at all. Some people have even produced collections as paintings. Here is Bruegel's Children's Games. And this is an interesting collection that is the intersection of the creative element of collecting with the acquisitive element of creating. Or collecting ships could mean that Stefan buys the Book of Origin for the imaginary ship in whatever constraint suits him. Could be illustrated books, could be finely bound books, pop-ups, first editions. This $50,000 first edition of Moby Dick is the origin, of course, of the Pequod. Or it could mean that he buys or makes model imaginary ships. Here is a lovely model of Jack Aubrey's HMS Surprise. And it seems to me that a collection of model ships would be a near perfect imaginary collection of ships. However, if he were a multi-billionaire, I suppose it could mean that in each case he buys the real ship that played the part of the imaginary ship in the movie. So here is Jack Aubrey's HMS Surprise from Master and Commander. But then, do you see, it would no longer be an imaginary ship. It would be a real ship with a different name. And this, I think, seems the least effective of the choices to represent the imaginary ship. Similarly, if you wanted a collection of imaginary books, and if you yourself were willing to write all the text for an imaginary book, say Georges Perec's Beds I Have Slept In, if you wrote the book, and then if it were published, and then if you did the same for all of your imaginary books, you would still not have a collection of imaginary books. You would have a collection of real books taken from ripped-off ideas. And I think somehow that is a step across some important line. It would be very impressive, just as a fleet of ships would be impressive, but it would be less imaginary than one might wish. So I think that raises the interesting question of just what these books are for anyway. What are the uses of imaginary books? Well, there are three kinds. The first set of uses are the uses of the book in its book of origin. In the story, what is it used for? It could be used to amuse, so Shakespeare in Baby Talk by Raymond Chandler. It could be used to puzzle or to produce a paradox. So Pierre Menard's book, The Problems of a Problem, which is mentioned in Borges's book, Pierre Menard, the author of the Quixote. This gets deep very quickly, doesn't it? It can be used as a MacGuffin. A MacGuffin is a device that drives the plot, but has no other purpose. So the Wild Book in Vioro's eponymous novel is a MacGuffin. Or it could be used to connect the book to other books. So young Baudolino, the young Italian fellow in Eco's eponymous novel, Baudolino is in 12th century Paris at the Library of St. Victor when he invents in a letter some of the books that Rabelais' Pantagruel will find there in Gargantua 2 centuries later. It's a beautiful example of intertextuality. It can be to provide background, as does the Encyclopedia Galactica in Asimov's Foundation series, or for that matter, in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It could be a simple plot device, so Ezra Chater's The Couch of Eros in Tom Stoppard's play Arcadia, when this book determines what happens in the plot. Or it can be the determinant element in the plot. The book The Mad Tryst is the instrument that causes the fall of the House of Usher in Edgar Allan Poe's extraordinary tale. It can be the overall structure of the book. So Tazio Bazakbal's Outside the Town of Malbork forms the interior frame story for the book, for Calvino's book, If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. Or it can be a literal play within a play. Here's the murder of Gonzago in Hamlet, where it functions as the mousetrap. Or it can create what's called a mise en abîme, a book about a book that is itself, and it's an infinite regress. So Peter and Catherine Sagamore's Tidewater Tales occurs in John Barth's Tidewater Tales, and it works sort of like the never-ending story eats its own tail as well. Or it could just be satire. So the Baron Gaffner of Banyalto in Vonnegut in Breakfast of Champions. Or it could be used to add credibility, or to describe a fictional author, or to compare two writers, or to present an absent character. There are many, many uses in the Book of Origin. But there are also uses in reality for imaginary books. Max Beerbohm said he wanted them just for the pleasure of having them on the shelf. He wanted to see the books themselves ranged upon goodly shelves, he said. You could use them for an exhibition, for example. You could use them as a prop in a play or a movie. So Devon Eastland made these lovely bindings for Greta Gerwig's movie of Little Women. Did you see that? It's a 2019 movie. It's good. And Devon actually is the bookbinder in the movie, if you see it. They can be used for a jib door, like all these imaginary books in their false shelves on the door at the library at Lamport Hall. Or they can be used as a game element. This is from the game Myst, where each of the two brothers is imprisoned in a book. Or, and I just figured this out, they could be used as a Zoom background. Don't you think that a set of imaginary books would be a killer background? I've never really done this. I mean, till right now, I've not done it, but I've been very tempted to. Or it can be used to present a case. So the thoughts on the prevention of the diseases most usual among seamen by Stephen Maturin in Patrick O'Brien's Desolation Island. This book is used as an argument for why British sailors needed better medical care. Or it could be used to shock. So the conditioning of the embryo in Huxley's Brave New World. Or it can be used as revenge. After John Donne was disowned and then imprisoned by Lord Egerton, Donne defamed Egerton by listing a book in his courtier's catalogue that was called Egerton's spiritual art of enticing women, or preaching beneath the undergarments. It can be used as a personal attack. This is the metaphysics of lying, which is attributed to the Maréchal de Retz in the Bibliothèque of Madame de Montpensier. Or it can be used as a literary judgment. Tributes is all about the poetry of Emmeline Grangerford in Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. Or it can be used to produce critical doubt. This is important. The rise of the colored empires is mentioned in Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby in order to cast critical doubt on the character of Tom Buchanan. As Antoinette Lafarge said, fictive art produces complicated forms of doubt. Doubt is one of the chief shields against authoritarianism, or that narrowing of thought that leads to doctrinaire thinking. And then lastly, there are conceptual uses of imaginary books. They're meta uses. So they can be used for insight into the nature of fiction. This is The Garden of Forking Paths by Tsui Pen, and it occurs in Borges's fictions. Here is, it can be used for therapy for the author. When Dorothy Sayers was an impoverished young writer, she made herself feel better by giving really great gifts to one of her characters. So she gave her character, the writer Harriet Vane, a runaway bestseller. And when Sayers herself could not afford to buy a car, she gave Harriet that little sports car she has in Gaudy Night. They can be used as a mechanism for writing about the struggle of writing. So here is the Pulitzer Prize-winning Chain of Command by Youngblood Hawke in Wook's eponymous novel, Youngblood Hawke, in which Hawke is struggling with what it means to write a novel. And it can be used to create unfulfillable desires. So the architecture of country houses in Crowley's Little Big, it's used to explore the relationship between house architecture and the realm of fairy. Little Big is a great book. If you haven't read it, and you get a chance to. It can be used to disorient. So in Evil and Waz, Dance to the Music of Time, we read about Redhead's mysterious book with the impossibly disorienting title, Than Whom, What Other? And finally, an imaginary book can be used to raise awareness in readers that not everything they read is real or true. Example would be Goldstein's The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism in Orwell's 1984. And this is, of course, especially important during periods in which deception and lies are considered to be acceptable forms of discourse. In the realm of the imaginary, there is this concept of fictive art. Fictive art was invented to sow seeds of doubt about the certitudes of received art history and institutionally sanctioned art practices. But its use goes far beyond the artistic establishment. So I'll give some examples. In 1964, an artist named Pierre Brasseau had 4 paintings in an international competition held at Gallery Christinae in Gothenburg, Sweden. Brasseau's work received considerable critical approval and some criticism, but Rolf Enderberg wrote, Brasseau paints with powerful strokes, but also with a clear determination. Pierre is an artist who performs with the delicacy of a ballet dancer. And it appeared that Brasseau's reputation was made until it was revealed that Pierre was a chimpanzee who lived at the Gothenburg Zoo. It turned out that Dake Axelson, who was a journalist, had borrowed him from the zoo and taught him to daub paint on canvas and had him produce a substantial number of paintings. And then Axelson selected the most convincing ones for the exhibition. At this point, it was noted that one of the critics had remarked, only an ape could have done this. But Anderberg came back with, hey, it still was the best painting in the exhibition. In the case of fictive art, we want the viewer to be at first interested and then get a little uncomfortable with the art object, and then get the point and join in the fun. Otherwise, if there's no reveal, then it's just a prank, and we piss people off without letting them think. It's a little like playing sardines. The fun comes from the act of getting in on the game. Now, this is the revolutionary book that defined fictive art. It was written by Antoinette Lafarge, and yes, that is her real name, although Antoinette does occasionally send an actor to academic conferences to play her while she sits in the back of the auditorium for the first half of her talk. Antoinette says, even when you know a piece of work is fictive art, it doesn't lose its power or complexity as artwork. Outing a fictive artwork is not the end of the story. It's the end of the beginning. It's the end at the beginning of the discussion. Now, we can think of fictive art as an intentional practice that sits in an area defined by three boundary concepts: fakery, hoax, and imposture, combined to form fictive art. Fakery is about an object, the creation of an object. The hoax is about creating a routine about the object. And imposture is a person who takes a role to present the object. Now, you will realize immediately there is a dark side to this constellation, and it occurs when the fakery is a forgery, or when the hoax is a fraud, or when the imposture becomes identity theft, and these are all crimes. However, on the side of the angels, the fakery can produce a replica or a facsimile for education, and the hoax can produce a game or a fantasy, and an imposture can produce a performance or even a whole play. In the case of imaginary books, the fakery produces the simulacrum, the object, the hoax produces the bibliography, and the imposture is done by the owner or author or curator or the author of the book of origin or someone else entirely, say someone who's pretending to be a character from the book. But that all works together to create the imaginary book. And here is the full relationship between fictive art and imaginary books. I think this draws all of the relationships accurately. So fictive art is intended to raise points for discussion about what is real and what is true. And I think to discuss that, I have to step out of my imposture persona for just a minute to talk to you, but I'll be right back. All of the books in my collection are real imaginary books. They were all invented and described by another writer in another book. I did not make any of this up. But for this reason, I have been unable to include one set of imaginary books, and that is the most poignant and significant of non-existent books, those that are deeply lost. Deeply lost books are the books of which we have no record whatsoever, even in principle, because they are the works that would have been produced by potential writers if they had ever had the opportunity to put them to paper. Not just those of Gray's mute, inglorious Milton, but all of those books that would have been written by women or slaves or both, or by proletarian workers who were discouraged from doing any such thing and even from being taught to read and write. Think, for example, of the deeply lost books that would tell of the experience of enslaved people in the parts of the Confederacy where it was illegal for a person of color to be taught to read or to write. In some states, Black people who were discovered writing suffered having their right forefinger cut off. The United States is the only country that I know of to have had such anti-literacy laws. Even the Taliban, who forbid most education to women, still permit the teaching of basic literacy. These deeply lost books are books that never were, and never were referenced by other books, and have no representation in my collection or anywhere else for that matter. In such a world, some justification of the fakery and jollity in my collection seems necessary. I would hope that the kind of play demonstrated here would encourage the discussion of three things. One is the ways by which we now distinguish truth from falsehood, especially amid the sophisticated deceptions produced by the fog of artificial intelligence. Two is the reasons that such fakery is so much fun for the faker, and it is. And I'm afraid it is even in its most distasteful and harmful forms. And finally, what we can do collectively to reestablish respect for objective truth, a commonplace trust in reality, and a commitment to scientific knowledge. Alberto Manguel, writing in the Repubblica, said that hosting this exhibition represented un coraggioso atto di fede poetica, that hosting this exhibition was a courageous act of poetic faith. I declare a personal interest in the matter because without means to distinguish between fact and fiction, between innocent play and malevolent deception, it would certainly be better for me to destroy the collection rather than risk its offering any kind of legitimacy to the fabrications we face. That destruction would be a shame because imaginary books offer us extraordinary examples of the exuberant creativity of some of our greatest writers. It behooves us to wonder at these strange, impossible volumes, for their example is important. Every book in the world was an imaginary book when it was first begun to be written. I think it may be helpful to consider just when and how imaginary books were begun to be written. Because the ancients were so creative in their descriptions of imaginary places, how's Atlantis, and imaginary people, it's very surprising that there's so few instances of imaginary books that occur before the early modern period. In fact, Gustave Brunet went so far as to state categorically, we encounter no trace of them in antiquity or in the Middle Ages. But origins are tricky, and Brunet was wrong. The earliest imaginary books go all the way back to ancient Greece and even to Egypt and Sumer. People in all ages have taken delight in wonder and a good sense of humor and an inclination to pranks and literary shenanigans. Each of the categories of the imaginary has its own early antecedents, and each one tells us something about its creator's imagination. Now, the three categories you recall are lost, unfinished, and fictive books. Most of the very early examples are lost books. And the earliest lost books are probably the hardest ones to assign a date to. First, because most of them that did not survive, we just don't know about. and second, because of the difficult question as to what date do you assign? Is it the date the book was lost, or the date we realized the book was lost, or the date when it was written, or the earliest date when we know a copy existed, or when the last copy was destroyed? For example, the earliest known lost Greek book seems to be Homer's Margites, the story of the eponymous bonehead, of whom Plato said, polypistato erga kakos depistato panta, that is, he knew how to do many things, but all badly. This book disappeared in antiquity, but we know it existed in 350 BCE when Aristotle read it, and we are likely to assign a creation date of, say, 850 BCE, when Homer, whoever that may have been, may in fact have composed it. But the oldest book from any country that we know existed and to which we can assign an author is probably the so-called Hymn of Praise of Enheduanna, and this goes back to 2250 BC. It's a very early work, and most of the text has been lost since antiquity, even including the incipit. It is so lost that we don't even know its name. Enheduanna was the high priestess of Inanna under Sargon the Great during the conquest of Sumer, and Sir Leonard Woolley discovered her existence in 1927 when he was digging up the city of Ur. Her nameless work is probably the most ancient identifiable work that we can confidently call a lost book. But here is her picture. She's second from the left, making an offering to Inanna. It's also difficult to know how to date the first unfinished or promised book, whether it should be the date it was first mentioned, or the date it was begun to be written, or the date it was abandoned, or the date of the author's death, or the date it was first realized to have been to not have been written. We would not strike the shield of truth so very far off boss, however, if we were to declare the earliest promised but unwritten book to be Book 3 of Lucian's Aletheia Gemata, A True Story. Now that's the title. I'm not describing this story. It's called A True Story, but it's an amazing tall tale of ancient Greece. The second book recounts an astonishing yarn of a whale's belly, a sea of milk, the island of cheese, the Isle of Cork, whose men walk on the sea with cork feet, the Isle of the Blessed, where in the Elysian fields they dine with, get this, Homer and Odysseus together. And then later they have dinner with Calypso on her island, and they encounter the pumpkin pirates and the nut sailors at sea, and visit the lands of the bullheads and the ass legs, and finally arrive in another completely different world, which Lucian promises to describe in Book 3, and this he did not do because he never wrote the anxiously anticipated book, an omission that one Greek scribe called his biggest lie. The determination of the oldest imaginary book raises different questions. Should the date be the fictional book's putative writing, or the date of its fictional publication, or the date of the publication of the book of origin? Now, this can amount to a difference of many hundreds of years. The oldest fictional book of which I am aware is the Magic Book of Thoth, which is described in the Tale of Setna. The date of the imaginary book goes back at least as far as Ramses II, so before 1250 BCE, and the referencing book is Ptolemaic, so roughly 300 BCE, and that's a difference of almost a millennium. But all of these examples are sort of outliers. In none of the cases did these extraordinary books inspire a wave of imitators, and it was not till many centuries had passed that the imaginary book became an established device. And that occurred much later in a very different world in 16th century Paris. Francois Rabelais was born in 1490 in Chinon and became a humanist, a writer of satire and bawdy, and the creator of Gargantua and Pantagruel. He was critical of ecclesiastics and scholastics and the clergy in general, and it is not surprising that he would eventually have Pantagruel satirize their book collections when he visits the great library at the Abbey of St. Victor in Paris. Now, Rabelais' style of writing very happily included the technique of listing as a literary device, and it was very natural for his criticism to take the form of a sort of catalog for that library. It is also not only the first collection of this kind of imaginary books, but also the first imaginary collection that was housed in a real library building. I will translate a few of the Latin and Old French titles to give an idea of the nature of this library. It contained The Codpiece of the Law, The Pecker-Bonkerness of Preachers, The Decrees of the University of Paris on the Freedom of Décolletage among Young Women, The Gentle Art of Farting in Polite Society, and The Elephant Balls of the Brave. Raphael is also followed by several direct imitators, and then by John Donne and Thomas Browne, and then by early French plays that offer book lists to be recited by an actor in the play. Rabelais is followed along another vector by Laurence Sterne and then Honoré de Balzac, and then a broad range of modern novelists who make use of imaginary books within their stories. These book lists on one side and books appearing in novels on the other side have been the two sources of the streams of imaginary literature that find their confluence in my collection. The other great origin, of course, is the Fortsas Library. In 1840, all of the great collectors and booksellers and librarians and bibliophiles in Europe received this little catalog. It announced an auction in the town of Banch, Belgium, of the astonishing library of the eccentric Count de Fortsas. Each of the 52 items in his collection were unique, the only existing copy of each work, and each one was of such a great peculiar interest to at least one of the gentlemen who received the catalog that it was almost as if the description had been written with him in mind. And so off to the little town of Banch set out all the great bibliophiles of Europe, or their representatives, with instructions to buy at any cost those particular volumes. But when they arrived at the village of Banch, they discovered to their chagrin that the office of the notary who was to hold the auction did not exist, nor did the street where the notary kept his office, nor could they locate the notary himself. There was only a sign that said that the auction had been canceled because the books had all been sold to the village library, which didn't exist either. The entire affair had been a hoax perpetrated by Renier Chalon, a military officer, bibliophile, and notorious prankster. The Fortsas hoax has, over the years, given rise to many other jokes like this, in both the book world and in the art world. In the arts, hoaxes tend to be at some level quite serious, intended to critique modern culture in general and the art world in particular. In book lists, hoaxes tend to be satiric. In novels, when imaginary books appear, they tend to be either ludic and just there for the entertainment value, or they're part of the plot structure. Think of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But finally, let me stress the ubiquity of imaginary books in the novels of modern writers as varied as Cabell, Beerbohm, Borges, Burgess, Barth, McMurtry, Styron, Gardner, Lovecraft, Sayers, Proust, Poe, Powell, Perrick, Waugh, Eco, Calvino, Vonnegut, Nabokov, and a very great many more, as well in theater, cinema, television, and social media. Imaginary books are all around us. I just happen to have the hard copy. I must add that there was a silver lining to the Fortsas hoax. On that dismal return to Paris, and you can imagine how sad everyone was, 9 of the tricked bibliophiles formed what would become the Fortsas Club. Le Club Fortsas is the home of my collection. It is in this lovely building at 145 Rue Lafayette in Paris. It's in the 10th arrondissement. The club was named for Jean Nepomucen Auguste Pilchot, the Comte de Fortsas, that great collector of unique books. Here is his picture from one of the family albums. Uncle Fortsas' picture is here, along with the official Fortsas codpiece that has been adapted as the club coat of arms. The original objectives of the club were to console and sustain the spirits of the members of the society in the wake of any further bibliophilic disasters. But since that time, the club has grown into one of the oldest and most respected bibliophilic societies in the world, mounting outstanding exhibitions, lectures, and symposia. The club membership includes men and, since 1949, women, whose interests extend through the most distant and unusual avenues of the bibliophilic world. Here's a picture of Marie Odell, who is the FAB's liaison to Club Fortsas at the club. And I am told that any member of a FAB's club, so that includes the Book Club of California, any member of a FAB's club who has their picture taken in front of 145 Rue Lafayette and mails it to the club, you could just send it through me. That would be a good way to do that. Any member who does this will receive a reciprocal membership in the Club Fortsas. The clubhouse, an historic Haussmannian edifice, has been home to the Fortsas since 1868, when it was moved from its original location in the 8th arrondissement. Despite the restricted membership, the club maintains, in addition to the exhibition hall, its library, the famous dining room, and 5 bedrooms to provide for the visits of out-of-town members who are in from the provinces. Here are the entry hall and the old staircase, parts of the exhibition gallery, and the library. Now, I'm to advise you that the club is currently closed, unfortunately, for the correction of certain significant existential and ontological shortcomings that need to be corrected. But you can visit it at clubfortsas.org, and I would advise you to do that before you visit. And in closing, I would like to read the colophon from the catalog of my exhibition. This book was set by Matthew Young in RGME Bambino type, as created by Leslie French and made freely available by the Research Group on Manuscript Evidence. It was printed in the Czech Republic by A to Z Media on 80-pound silk. This is a real book about imaginary books. Imaginary books are printed on gossamer, the silk that dreams are made of, or so we imagine. Thank you very much for your attention and for having the exhibition at the club.
Reid, you just cannot be stopped. You are so deep in this imaginary books phenomenon. I don't know if you'll ever come back to us.
It's a very deep rabbit hole, it turns out.
We have some time. We have time for some questions. So if you have a question or a comment, now is the time, if you're out there, to put it in the Q&A or in the chat. I've got both of them up here. And we're going to start with, there's some really fun questions here. One is one that I have been thinking about and wanting to talk to you more about, because we get questions all of the time about how you chose to make the books that are in the exhibition the way you made them. And
Ooh.
were they made like according to the description, or were they made according to kind of your directive, your imagination, in terms of size and materials and fonts and all of that kind of stuff? Like, how did that process work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is most of the fun of the collection, is deciding what did this book look like? Now, occasionally you do get a clue in the book of origin. Sometimes the book is described, and when it is, that doesn't exactly solve the problem, but it does give you a direction, because you can make it look just like that book. However, you might want a later edition. You might even want a future edition. It depends on the nature of the book, and part of it is that these are all books that I have loved in one way or another. The books of origin are books that I have loved, and so I have some kind of passion for it. One of the options is to make the book look like the first edition of the book of origin. So if I were going to make a book that occurred in Ulysses, I might choose to make a paper binding, light blue paper binding that would resemble the original publication out of the back of Shakespeare and Company. That could be, but I also might try to make it the way the book is described in the book of origin, or some interesting in-between edition that someone has published somewhere along the way. It's a wonderful discussion to get to have. Is what on earth did this thing look like?
So that leads to like that second big question, which is about your co-conspirators, the people who you worked with to construct, to make all of these, the books and any other artifacts that are part of the collection. Can you tell us about who you engaged, who you worked with? You don't have to name names.
I will. I will. These are unindicted co-conspirators. I feel very comfortable. I call them my book hunters, to stay in character. I probably should say that about half of these books I'm guilty of, and about half of them I've had help with. The chief among the culprits is Jeffrey Altpeter. Jeff is a historical bookbinder. He is in Boston. He is the head of the bookbinding department at North Bennett Street School in Boston. He has his own bindery in Somerville, specializes in traditional leather binding, metalworking for binding, and in bookbinding exhibits. He is a genius. He is also the facsimile binder for the Gardner Museum. Now, you may be aware that the Gardner Museum has had certain problems with theft over the years, and they are very sensitive to the possibility of something valuable being stolen. So when they put a valuable book on exhibition, they put a facsimile on exhibition. and they have Jeffrey make the book. When I learned he existed, I went to Boston and took him out for a drink and explained what I was trying to do. And after about the third drink, he agreed, okay, maybe he could get involved with this. And he's done wonderful stuff. He did Byron's memoirs, the big red book, if you looked at it. He did Sappho's poems. He did the Alice book from Through the Looking Glass. He did a bunch of those. Also on the project was Martha Kearsley. Martha is a letterpress printer and bookbinder here in Portland, Maine. And she is a contract conservator at Harvard's Weissman Preservation Center, and a friend and a member of the Baxter Society. And she helped me with many of these books where the functional change was to change the label on an existing book. And she did most of those. And then Margot Dittmer is a specialty calligrapher who can write on anything. She's miraculous. And she did the handwriting on the titles of the ancient books. So the Aristotle comedy. She wrote the top part of that. My hand in Greek is okay for modern Greek, but not for ancient Greece. And she did the top, which is ancient, or it's Middle Ages, of course. And the bottom is a more recent label, and I managed that part of it. But she did the complicated handwritten work. And then there were other people who helped. I have a photographer who's a genius who helped me set up the photo shoot for these things, and a bunch of friends who have given me advice, either good or bad, on how to put these together.
Yeah, but so great crew. You had a lot of great folks join you for this. How did you decide which books? I mean, you said there is a lot of imaginary books. They're all around us. You have, I think, 120 in the book. We had about 100 and, I don't know, 5 or 6 in the actual exhibition here at the book club. How did you decide how big your collection was going to be? What books didn't get included that you haven't gotten to yet? And okay, there's your master list.
I have this list. It's a list library, you see. And some of these are in the collection now, and they all should be. So I'm looking for them. Yeah, I have a shopping list right here, which is the books that are already farmed out to be looked for.
Right.
Yeah. There are a lot of them. There are some books that cannot be in the collection. I have an absolutely beautiful, eye-wateringly beautiful book that I can't show you. It's from Tolkien. It's the Ennonotiae, the book of the accounting of the years. And I could not get permission from the Tolkien estate to use the alphabet, the Elvish alphabet. So I'm allowed to own the book, and I can show it privately. If you come visit me, I'll show it to you. But I cannot show it in public, which is too bad.
I'm going to put your address in the chat so everybody can come
Now,
to your
wait.
house. I did put the link to buy the book in the chat. If you're still here and you're interested and you don't have the book yet, it is for sale with Oak Knoll Press. The link is in the chat, so check it out there. I'm going to ask you about what's next for the exhibition. Is it going somewhere next? Do you have plans for it?
Next it is going to the Glickman Library at the University of Southern Maine at Portland. It's sort of a homecoming. And after that, uh, I'm in negotiation with a major university, and I can't talk about it yet, but I'm hoping that it gets a big show in the in Middle America.
Got it.
Since I've had it on the coasts, which is great, and my first choice, but I would like to have it in the middle too. So I'm working on that, and then we'd like to go take it to Europe, but I don't know
Yeah,
if that'll
great.
happen.
Some
That's
big
a
plans.
big operation.
Yeah. Overseas always is a big project.
Got to be a
Yeah.
challenge. I have
Yeah.
loved having it at the Book Club of California. That's been a real treat.
We have loved having it here. It has been super popular, busy, lots of reservations to come see it, lots of drop-ins to come see the exhibition. So it's been great to have it. It's been a very successful exhibition for us here at the
I'm
book club.
glad.
Yeah. There is one last question because we are past the top of the hour that I wanted to kind of throw out there because it's kind of interesting and we've never really talked about it. It has to do with AI generated books. And the question is, do you view AI generated books as imaginary books? Why or why not? But I think there's a couple of issues, topics in here about what is the value? How should we be looking at AI generated books? You have any thoughts on
I
that?
do, and this is probably a matter of taste. Um, None of the books use AI at all. The poster for the exhibition was done with AI by my editor, but none of the books were, and I suppose that's just a matter of taste. But I want the human hands on this work. That isn't to say that computers weren't used, but AI was definitely not. And I intend to keep the collection that way. But again, that's a personal decision. Other people might do things differently. Somebody just asked, can I answer one more question real quick?
Yeah, go ahead. Go
Okay,
ahead.
sure. Somebody just asked the great question, and since you hit the jackpot, I got to answer it. What's in the books? Is there text
Oh
in these
yeah.
books? Yeah, that's a great question. And when I'm in character, my answer is you have to understand these books are magical, and for technical thaumaturgical reasons, they cannot be opened. If you were to try to force one of the books open, it would protect itself by changing into something else, which is a way of saying, yeah, these books are made from some other book, or they're blank. About half of them are blank. But don't tell anybody that because it
Yeah.
ruins the illusion, you see.
That's it. You heard it. You heard it here. Don't share that with anyone else. Uh, that is the secret to the imaginary books. Well, I'm going to say, Reed, it's always a pleasure, a joy, a treat, a laugh to speak with you and to hear you talk about imaginary books. I always learn something too. I'm fascinated now to go and make my own list of something
Oh
imaginary
yeah,
that you started at the
do
beginning.
that, and share
That's
it.
that's and share it. I love that. Imaginary plants, the games, the countries. My mind is just like, what else can I
You
make a
could
list
make
of?
yeah, boxed sets of each of those imaginary games.
Yeah,
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 that would
that's
be very cool.
so thank you. There's lots of great comments in the chat and the Q&A. I'll share those with you afterwards.
Thank you.
People who have seen the exhibition loved it. Um, and if you haven't seen it, you got to get the exhibition catalog, the book. You got to check that out and look for it in its next presentation. The next time it's on view, you got to go across the country and find it.
Come visit us in Maine.
Visit us in Maine. So Reed, thank you so much. This was really great. It's great to have you, and it's great to have everyone here join us tonight. I want to thank everybody. First of all, I'm going to thank Reed again. Thank you, Reed, so much. I'm sure everybody out there is thumbing up and putting stuff in the chat to say thank you. What a great presentation. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I hope you will join us for another book club program, either in person here at the club rooms in San Francisco or online on Zoom. We have a lot of hybrid programs coming up, virtual and in-person programs, and you can register for all of them online at bccbooks.org/programs or by using the link in the weekly emails that you're getting from us about our upcoming programs and events. So thanks everyone for joining us. We look forward to seeing you here online or in person soon. Have a wonderful evening. Take care and have a great night. Bye, everyone.